Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're unpacking an absolute heavyweight of 20th century literature, Ernest Hemingway's classic, A Farewell to Arms. But we're going to look at this masterpiece through a very specific lens. You see, Hemingway didn't just casually throw this story together. It is meticulously constructed. Instead of just a continuous stream of chapters, the novel is deliberately organized into 5 distinct books, comprising exactly 41 chapters. And by breaking down this specific 41-chapter structure, we can see exactly how Hemingway builds tension, develops his characters, and ultimately delivers those devastating somatic blows. So let's unpack how he actually pulls this off.
Okay, let's dive right into this. This is basically our narrative map, breaking the entire novel down act by act. We've got Book 1, War and Meeting. Then Book 2, Love and Recovery. Book 3 takes us into Retreat and Escape. Book 4 is our Swiss Sanctuary. And finally, Book 5, Tragic Farewell. After we map all of that out, we'll wrap up by synthesizing the big overarching themes of love, war, and loss. And this timeline brilliantly illustrates how the narrative weight is distributed across those 41 chapters. It's not perfectly even, and you know what? That is completely on purpose. Books 1 and 2 take up the bulk of the early novel to really establish the world and the relationships. Then, Book 3 hits us with this frantic burst of action. Book 4 is a tight, brief little sanctuary. And Book 5? Well, that's a rapid, incredibly intense conclusion. It's a perfectly escalating journey that pulls you, the reader, right along with the protagonist.
All right, let's start at the beginning. Book 1, War and Meeting. This covers chapters 1 through 12, where the absolute chaos of the World War I Italian front collides with a chance encounter. We are thrown right into the deep end here. Our protagonist, Lieutenant Frederick Henry, he's an American ambulance driver serving in the Italian army, meets Catherine Barclay. She's a British nurse. And right from their very first casual meeting, Hemingway introduces this really subtle but absolutely crucial foreshadowing of grief. Catherine is already mourning her fiancé, who was recently killed in combat. She brings the heavy psychological toll of the war into Frederick's relatively detached, almost cynical world, immediately setting the stakes for the profound loss that permeates the entire novel. But look at the stark contrast that gets set up here. On one side, we have this casual, almost playful early romance. Frederick initially treats his flirtation with Catherine pretty lightly, almost like a game, just to distract himself from the sheer boredom of waiting for battle. But then reality hits. A major Italian offensive crashes in, and Frederick is seriously injured by a mortar explosion. The lightness, completely gone in an instant. It's immediately replaced by blood, pain, and the terrifying, violent randomness of combat. That violence leads us right into Book 2, Love and Recovery, spanning chapters 13 through 24, where the tone takes a dramatic shift toward peace. We step out of the mud and into the much more sterile, quiet environment of a hospital in Milan. And in this sanctuary, the stakes escalate significantly. This isn't just a casual wartime flirtation anymore. As Frederick recovers and undergoes surgery on his shattered knee, Catherine actually gets stationed at his hospital, and their romance deepens into this genuine, life-altering love. They really start dreaming of a future beyond the trenches. And then, a massive turning point. Catherine reveals she's pregnant. Suddenly, it's not just about surviving the war as individuals. They are trying to create new life right in the middle of a continent that is literally tearing itself apart. But as you might expect, the comfort just doesn't last. There's a jarring thematic contrast built directly into Book 2. Summer ends, Frederick heals up, and he's forced to leave that peaceful sanctuary in Milan to rejoin the Italian army. The transition back to the front lines is incredibly harsh. The war hasn't been on pause waiting for him. In fact, the situation for the Italian forces has grown significantly worse. Which brings us to the chaotic frenzy of Book 3, Retreat and Escape, chapters 25 through 33. Now, what's really interesting about this section is how the pace of the novel just completely shifts. The Italian army suffers severe setbacks, leading to this massive, chaotic, totally disorganized retreat. And during this total collapse, military police start indiscriminately executing retreating officers. Frederick gets pulled from the line. He's facing certain death. In a split-second decision, he dives into a fast-flowing river to escape execution. He officially deserts the army. This is the ultimate moment of fate versus personal choice. The war, or fate, tried to kill him indiscriminately. He chooses personal survival instead, washing himself clean of his military obligations in that river, and sets out to find Catherine. After a really tense reunion, they realize Italy is simply no longer safe for a deserter.
I mean, imagine the sheer desperation here. Frederick and Catherine, borrowing a small boat, rowing through the dead of night across Lake Maggiore, absolutely desperate to reach the neutral territory of Switzerland. It is an exhausting, dangerous crossing, a literal and metaphorical attempt to just row away from the war completely and claim their own destiny. And miraculously, they make it. Book 4, Swiss Sanctuary, chapters 34 through 37. Safe in neutral territory, the frantic pace slows right down again. Up in the mountains, they are completely isolated from the global conflict. They spend their days taking walks, reading, and waiting for the birth of their child. The tone here is so full of warmth and hope as they imagine their future family life, eventually relocating closer to the city for better medical care. But because this is Hemingway, even in this beautiful, snowy sanctuary, there is this subtle, creeping tone of impending tragedy. The very isolation that keeps them safe from the war also means they are entirely dependent on each other and on fate. And that brings us to the final, devastating act. Book 5, Tragic Farewell, chapters 38 through 41. Let's move to and see how this builds, leaving the sanctuary behind for a heartbreaking conclusion where all hope is rapidly stripped away. After months of joyful anticipation, Catherine goes into labor. But almost immediately, severe medical complications arise. The biological reality they face becomes just as perilous as the battlefield they fled. Despite all the doctor's efforts, the baby is delivered stillborn. The beautiful dream of the future they built up in those mountains, instantly shattered. And the tragedy doesn't stop there. Catherine suffers massive hemorrhaging. Frederick can only watch, completely helpless, as the woman he abandoned absolutely everything for slips away. Catherine dies. In the final haunting pages of chapter 41, Frederick forces the nurses out of the room so he can say goodbye. But he notes that it's like saying goodbye to a statue. He leaves the hospital and walks back to his hotel in the rain, utterly alone. Section 6. Themes of love, war, and loss. Let's pull all of this together. Now that we've walked through that chronological plot map, let's step back and look at the overarching lessons. Think about Frederick's journey for a second. He started out as a somewhat cynical, detached ambulance driver, basically just floating through a war he didn't really feel a part of. He ends as a grieving lover, having risked everything for a connection that is ultimately ripped away from him. So what does this massive psychological shift, set against the backdrop of global devastation, ultimately mean? So the crucial point is that Hemingway uses this entire 41-chapter, 5-book structure to violently contrast our human search for meaning against a cold, chaotic world. Look at these themes. We have love amid war, that desperate attempt to find beauty in horror. We see the sheer brutality and absolute randomness of conflict. Remember, Frederick wasn't wounded in some heroic infantry charge. He was literally eating cheese when a random mortar hit him. It's a dark irony that perfectly captures Hemingway's message. We explore immense loss and grief, but also the courage and endurance required to simply keep walking in the rain afterward. The entire novel is this brutal tug of war between personal choice, like deserting the army, and fate, like the biological complications that take Catherine's life. Which brings us to our final thought today. Frederick Henry managed to escape the Italian army. He managed to literally row across the lake and escape the greatest war the world had ever seen to that point. But he couldn't escape the fragile reality of human mortality. It leaves us with a lingering, powerful question. In a world governed by random conflict and sudden tragedy, can any of us ever truly escape fate? Or is the best we can do simply to love bravely while we still have the chance? It's a heavy question for sure, and it's exactly why Hemingway's 41-chapter masterpiece remains absolute essential reading today. Thanks for joining me on this explainer, and I'll catch you next time.